this is Dr. Supreet Kaur from Department of Commerce, Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. So today we'll be continuing our series on export and import. So when we talk about export and import documentation specifically, and when we have already discussed about the Incoterms in the last two series, therefore now comes the important point, that is the payment and settlement terms. So when we talk about payment and settlements in terms of your international trade, so there are majorly 5 major methods of payments in international trade. Now, when we say the methods of payment in international trade, basically we are talking about the settlement terms that is to be taken up when dealing at global level. So, there are 5 methods which we segregate them into advance payment method, letter of credit method, documentary collection, open account and consignment. Now, one by one we will be talking about the benefits and the associated risk with each of the payment method in international trade from both the importers and the exporters point of view. Starting off with this advance method. Now, when we say advance payment method, that means herein this is the most advantageous situation in case of the exporters, where they will be receiving the entire amount of the consignment in advance. So now understand, for an importer where he has to make the payment for the entire consignment before receiving the goods, and he has to worry about whether the goods received are damaged or they are incomplete or they suffer from some deficiency. So in that case, most of the risk goes on to the whom? That is the importer. So that is why this very method of payment is classified as the most secure one for the exporter and the least secure one for the importer, because importer has to pay for the entire consignment in advance and he has to undertake all those risks that we read in the past in the Incoterms, whether it is a risk of the insurance, whether it is the risk of getting the clearances from the ports, or whether it is the risk of loading and unloading the cargo. So herein we can see that if the entire payment of the consignment is made by the importer in advance, then he is not in an advantageous position as the exporter is. So herein you can just see that from through this chart, wherein you can see that this is just like a matrix wherein you can see about the most secure methods of payment and the least secure methods of payment. And herein you can also gauge into that these two differ, right, and totally goes in contradictory positions when it comes to exporter and the importer. So when we talk about the exporter, you can see that most secured option is your cash in advance, whereas for the importer it becomes the least secured one. Similarly, if we go about consignment, it is the most secured one for the importer, and whereas for the exporter this is the least secured method of payment. So thereby we will be talking about these 5 methods of payment in detail, starting up about your advance payment. So herein you can see that exporter, he considers this cash in advance as the most secure, whereas the importer, he does not consider this method as to be as much secure or does not prefer this mode of payment. Reason being, he has to pay for the entire consignment in advance. Number 2, there is a risk of insurance. Number 3, there is a risk of loss. Number 4, there is risk that the wrong consignment or the incomplete consignment is dispatched to the importer. So there are various other associated risks, and especially when both the parties, that your importer and exporter, they are not known to each other. When there is altogether a new customer, right, which the exporter is trading with, or a new exporter with which the importer is dealing up with. So in that case it becomes very risky transaction, thereby it is being very minimally being preferred by your importers, and that is why it is being preferred by exporter, because they get a very surety about their payments, that no matter what, but they have already received the payment in advance, right. So they are much secured about this option, where whether even there is, of course they have to deal with those terms of trade. That does not mean that they would default on to everything just because they have received the cash in advance. It is just like the risk passes on immediately to the importer's end, right. So when we say this advance payment, this being considered as the most safest method of payment, wherein you get the entire cash for shipping the goods in advance, right. Now when we say that getting the cash here does not mean that you get exactly the the paper money, but you get the reimbursement or the settlement in the bank accounts through wire transfers. That is what it takes place in the international payment settlements, or the payment is being transferred through credit card payments, or you utilize that SWIFT account, so that whatever funds are there that are being immediately transferred to the exporter, right, even though the consignment is not dispatched by the exporter to the importer. So that means it is being considered the most safest one from the exporter's point of view. Now there is one more thing, that herein if any being funds that are being held in escrow account, so until a shipment is received, so that means that until or unless you receive a shipment, that is the importer, so until that time he will not receive, or you could say will not dispatch the payment in the account of the exporter. So that means it says that when the funds are there held in the escrow account. So escrow account is one account wherein certain terms and conditions are attached to the main account. So when we say now that funds are there lying in the escrow accounts, that means that there are certain terms and conditions that are attached to this escrow account, and the minute exporter meet these conditions, the importer will do what, that he will immediately transfer the funds into the exporter's account. So that is why it is said that either you are doing through a cash, or your these credit cards or wire transfers, or the funds being held in the escrow account, so they all being considered as a part of your advance payment. So now when we say that it being very advantageous for the exporters, so as I discussed that it is the least secured one for the importer, because he has to bear the maximum risk of you could say not receiving the consignment. So that is why it is being less desired by the customers, right. Moreover, exporters they believe that if they receive the cash in advance before shipping the orders, then there is no risk of default. So that means they are very secure that okay, even before I send the consignment, the importer is sending me out the funds, that is the cash or via wire transfer. So that means the exporter is superbly, you could say, secured about that settlement transaction. And moreover, he needs not to worry about whether the importer would default while making the payment, or he would deduct the payment, right. So that means he gets superbly secured about that, and that is why you would see that this sort of method being not preferred much by the customer, that is your importer. So that is why you would see that he would not give that orders to those specific exporters who are only giving this option of advance payment. So because the world is so competitive, one method of payment are never ever offered by these exporters. They rather offer multiple, or you could say various methods of your payment. So that ways you can see upon that the importer, he would rather go for a customer who does not offer them only one mode of payment, and that too in advance payment method. So that is why if the exporter is only offering this very method of payment, which is their advance payment, then there are high probabilities that he would lose the customers in international market, because that customer would be having various other competitors or exporters per se who are offering various different methods of payment. So that is why the buyer would not prefer such exporters who are only giving one method of payment. So that is about your advance payment, where the entire settlement takes place before receiving or before shipping the orders, right. So that is why it says that this is the major drawback of having this cash in advance, that many customers, they would not be interested. Or second condition could be they are not even able to afford the payment in advance. So that means it can give a big blow to the cash, and buyers would be concerned that what if they may not receive the shipment, what if the shipment is damaged, what if the shipment is lost somewhere. So that means as a result, this requires that an exporter that requires this very method, that is cash in advance, would receive comparatively fewer orders from its customers, and sometimes there are high chances that it may lose the customers to the sellers who are offering much flexible payment terms and conditions. So that is you could say the pros and the negative pointers for having this very method of payment with respect to exporter and the importer. Now the next method that comes into place is your letter of credit. Now letter of credit is what? It is just like a documentary credit. That means the minute you complete that documentary requirement, the payment will be transferred to the exporter's account. So now everything is attached to one condition, that is the exporter providing those documents, right. And the minute exporter provide that document, the settlement will be done immediately, right. Now you can simply just look onto your screen and just refer to this diagram, wherein you can see that the importer, he just passes an instruction to its issuing bank, that is the bank which is the importer's bank, who will do what? On to receiving the instruction from the importer and the supplementary documents from the exporter bank, the minute he receives the same, he will issue the payment to the exporter. That is why he is referred to as your issuing bank. So in this documentary credit method of payment, what will happen? This importer will approach its issuing bank whenever he is making an international transaction or trading with the exporter overseas. So the issuing bank, along with, he will send an instruction that the minute the goods being dispatched or shipped by the exporter, the issuing bank will do what? It will issue the payment to the exporter, right. So in this case, what happens? The importer, it reaches out to the issuing bank with certain instruction, and certain instruction is what? That the letter of credit is to be issued to whom? The nominated bank by the exporter. So exporter's bank is the nominated bank and importer's bank is the issuing bank. So in this case, what happens? The issuing bank will issue a letter of credit to whom? The nominated bank, right. Now that is contingent upon one thing, that is the documents being provided by this nominated bank to the issuing bank. So herein what will happen? The importer will approach to its issuing bank, and after receiving the instruction, issuing bank will go to whom? To the nominated bank, will issue the letter of credit, and then the nominated bank will do what? It will ask the exporter to provide the documents, right. The letter of credit will be is received by the issuing bank. Now the documents are required for the same, and what sort of document? That the goods are shipped. So exporter will get in touch with whom? This third party, which is a freight forwarder, right. Now this freight forwarder is a third party who will carry the consignment, who will carry the goods and will ship it them to the importer. Now this freight forwarder, this instruction gets passed on to the freight forwarder from the exporter. Now freight forwarder will do what? It will send the goods to the importer. So which is a commercial invoice or any other document which serves as a proof that the goods have been shipped by the exporter via this very third party logistical provider, logistics provider. So that document is to be provided by the exporter to the nominated bank, and then that nominated bank will provide that document to the issuing bank, and then when the issuing bank receives such documents that is being forwarded by the nominated bank, after receiving those documents, issuing bank will issue the payment to the nominated bank. So that is how entire mechanism of your this payment and settlement is, wherein issuing bank contingent upon a situation, and that situation is only one thing, that is the goods being dispatched by the exporter, and that supplementary document is to be provided by the exporter to the nominated bank, and via that nominated bank the documents reaches out to the issuing bank, which makes sure that the issuing bank has received the. Now understand this point, that this issuing bank is only considered or is only concerned about receiving that document. This bank is not bothered or doesn't get such instruction to see upon whether the goods that being dispatched or whether the goods that being received are inspected for the quality testing, or are they damaged, or are they incomplete. That is what is not the instruction since given by the importer. So that is why issuing bank will only look into the document that being provided by the nominated bank, which substantiates that okay, the goods being dispatched by the exporter. It doesn't gives a correspondence with respect to the quality aspect. It only talks about only one factor, that the goods being dispatched. Now the immediately that document that being received by the issuing bank, he will do what? The issuing bank will issue the payment to whom? The nominated bank. So that is how the the framework of this payment system is, wherein documentary credit is being issued by the issuing bank to the nominated bank, and nominated bank, when providing that one document which gives a proof of that the goods being dispatched to the importer via freight forwarder. So immediately he will receive the payment. So here the quality concerns and the concerns with respect to incomplete consignment, it doesn't come into picture, because the minute goods being dispatched, because in the previous method what was going up, even though the goods were not shipped, the exporter is receiving the payment. And in this case, one step further, that the exporter has to establish via documentary proof that the goods being dispatched by him. So in that case, he is going to receive the payment from the importer. So now herein, when we talk about this documentary method, herein we say that this is just like a letter of credit, wherein there being a contractual agreement, wherein this your issuing bank, that is the importer's bank, he will do what? As I mentioned through that diagrammatic representation, that he will act on behalf of the customer and would say what? That the minute the documents being received, right, it promises to make payment to the beneficiary or exporter against the receipt of complying stipulated documents. So the minute those documents being received by the importer, that means the issuing bank, it will issue what? It will issue the payment to the exporter. So herein it will typically being used as a intermediary bank to facilitate the transaction and make the payment to the exporter. So that is why when we say again from the exporters and the importers point of view, this is a favorable sort of your payment mechanism, which is much preferred by the exporters, and again least preferred or a least secured one for the importer, because herein the importer is not getting that opportunity to inspect the quality standards of the consignment, right. And again, when the parties are unknown to each other, they are coming into a contract for the first time, it is not a preferable mode of payment for the importer's point of view, because in that case he is unsure about whether the quality is good or not, whether the quality is as per graded quality standards or not, or whether the quality is being checked upon at various points or various checkpoints. So that part is missing out totally here. So that is why for the importer it is totally a no. That means he would not prefer for such mechanism, wherein he is not getting a you could say enough opportunity to inspect the goods or its quality standards, right. So this LC, that is a letter of credit, it's just like a separate contract from the main contract which both the parties are having it with each other. So one contract is wherein those terms of contract are mentioned, wherein importer and exporters come for an contractual agreement with each other, wherein they list out, okay, what all goods to be shipped and what all Incoterms are to be incorporated into the same. So that is a sales contract. Apart from that sales contract, there is a LC agreement, that is a separate contract, you would say, on which this this entire payment settlement mechanism is based, wherein banks are not concerned with the quality of the underlying goods or whether each party fulfills the terms of the sales contract or not. So herein the bank is not concerned about the further terms of contract. Bank is only concerned about the instruction that being received from the issuing bank with respect to the payment mechanism. That's it. And the bank would not see whether the goods received are defaulty, whether the goods received are substandard, whether the goods received are defective. So anything with respect to the consignment, the bank would not validate the same. Bank is saying, you gave me one instruction that the minute I receive this document from the supplier that the goods being shipped by him, so the instruction for the payment is to be conducted then and there only. So accordingly the bank is going to conduct its operations. The minute it receives that document, it will issue the payment to the exporter. So that is how this process is, and that is why the role of your issuing bank and nominated banks are limited to just making the payment and forwarding the documents and receiving the payment on the other hand. So that means we will say that the bank's obligation to pay is solely conditioned upon the seller's compliance with respect to the terms and conditions of this letter of credit, and if those conditions are not complied with, then the bank will not issue the payment to the exporter. So that ways in LC transactions, bank only deal into the documents, not only in the, you could say, not in the goods. So that only deals up into the documents. So again, to be understood that for each and every assignment or consignment per se, there is a different contract of sale. Similarly, LCs can be arranged easily for one-time transactions. It is not like one-time LC is conducted and every time that is going to be valid for every transaction the exporter and the importers enter into. So it says every time they enter into a transaction, LCs can be arranged, but for one time transaction, not for an ongoing series of transactions, because every time it comes up with a contract, then they have to correspondingly come up with the payment and settlement terms where the payment is to be made, right. Again, a letter of credit can be revocable and can be irrevocable. Generally, it is irrevocable. Why irrevocable? Because as we are saying on and on, that the bank is only concerned with the document, not with the goods. So the minute it receives the document, it will conduct its transaction. So that means it is irrevocable. It does not look into anything else, no other contingent situation being attached to. So therefore it cannot change. So that means that this is a irrevocable method or letter of credit wherein it cannot change unless both the party agrees. Now understand that until unless both the parties agrees to this point that the payment method is to be changed or any other contingent situation is to be attached or a document is to be asked from the exporter. So in that case, when the LC contract is generated, both the parties have to agree upon the same. If the contract is irrevocable, that means the LC is irrevocable, and vice versa in case of those where the LC is revocable. So your revocable LC is inadvisable because it would carry many risks for the exporter. The importer can change the issuing conditions as much as he wants. So that means it is not advisable for the exporters that when they are going for a letter of credit, that they should they should not prefer this revocable letter of credit, rather they should resort to this irrevocable letter of credit, right. So we will be talking about much more differences between the letter of credit which is a revocable one and which is a irrevocable one. much in detail in the coming segment.